I speak to you in the name of the Lord, our light and our salvation. Amen. Good morning. I'm so glad to be back with you. As many of you know, I was traveling last week, including last Sunday, and I spent several days last week in Flagstaff, Arizona, and its surrounding areas, visiting a couple of my friends, Danielle and Kenton, who I know from Chicago, but they have since moved to Flagstaff to make their profession working in the outdoors. And so both of them are professional backpacking guides. And if you're looking to spend a few days in the gorgeous outdoors where you might not know your way around, Danielle and Kenton are the friends that you want to be with. As I said, I've been to visit them before, and both times now I've said, take me wherever you think will be fun. And indeed it has been. So one day last week, on the first day, we drove about 20 minutes south of Flagstaff and went to Sedona. And I imagine several here have been to Sedona, so you know something of the grandeur and mystique and the vortex of beauty that place is. In the valley, which tends to be warmer than the surrounding areas, in the red rocks that emerge, and the green valleys and the cottonwoods that flow along with the river there. So they took me to Cathedral Rock, which was one of those big red rock formations, and as I saw it, I said, this is my kind of cathedral. And we set off hiking to the top of it. As we were about a third of the way up, there became a part of the path that got really steep. And it got really narrow, so narrow such that you could only fit one foot just barely in front of the other, almost as if you were climbing up a rivulet that water had cut sharply down that rock. So I looked at that and I said, I've never seen anything like that before. I'm not sure how to do that. I'm just going to pause here, catch my breath, get my bearings, and then give that a try. As I was paused there was another group of young women who were also taking a rest at that point. And since my friends had done this before and they had scampered up ahead of me, I found myself overhearing these young women's conversation. And they all had their phones out, and so did I, to be honest. I had my camera on. I had the cell service turned off, but I was using it for the camera because, oh my gosh, it was a gorgeous day. The sky was just a brilliant blue, no clouds to be seen, the whole valley out in front of us. And I was struck by what I heard, because one of them said, oh, well, this view is good enough for Instagram. Let's stop. You don't need to know what Instagram is or be fluent in any form of social media to know the gist of what they were saying, as if, okay, this is good enough for a picture. This is good enough to report back and say we were here. I see some heads shaking, and that's kind of what I did too. Because I was like, but who knows what's ahead? Like, there's most of the mountain ahead of us. Who knows what we would see if we keep going? Granted, there's a very hard part right in front of us, but what if we managed to get up that? What could we see? The view that would lay ahead of us was nowhere to be seen where we were there a third of the way up. Also, how would it challenge us? What physical energy and skill would I need to garner and figure out in the moment to just get up that steep incline? And who knows what lay ahead of it? How would I be transformed even by that climb? And so I went on ahead, and thanks be to God, I figured out that hard part. And there were more hard parts to come. and just with patience and endurance and a drive to see what was next. An immersion in the wonder and awe of this place is what propelled me one step after the next. Kenton and I reflected on this conversation when we got back that night. And as he is a backpacking guide and now leads groups of people all over the world, Brazil, Costa Rica, Alaska, he also has noticed in his now 8 years of doing this kind of work a trend toward that same comment that I overheard of being in it in order to get the picture, being in it in order to report back, being in it to check that box, being in it, I wonder, to seek validation in the box checking, in the picture taking, in the what people will say, rather than the journey inside, right? The validation that we all need and seek is not to be found outside of us, but we are born with it. Our God who speaks to us in the womb, who creates us before we are born, has created us in the wholeness that we so often seek outside of us. Even more than that, God has formed and birthed us with not only a being, an identity, but a call. Hear what Isaiah says to the servant, says to Jesus, says to Martin Luther King, says to Peter, says to you and to me. I have created you before you were born. I have called you before you were born. It is too light a thing, he goes on, even that you should be my servant, to raise up the tribes of Jacob and restore the survivors of Israel. It is too light a thing even to do that. It is too light a thing to report, to check a box, to seek validation outside of yourself. It is too light a thing even to do amazing things. I have created you and I have called you to be light. I have created you and I have called you and I have named you to be light to all the world, that my salvation will reach the ends of the earth. This word salvation in Hebrew means rescue. It also means wholeness. Who among us needs to hear a word of this wholeness? That we are born whole. And we are created and called to proclaim that wholeness to one another. It really makes a difference in who we are and how we are to one another, to know something of this call all the time. Martin Luther King Jr. did. He was born named Michael, and later chose the name Martin Luther, for himself, just like his father's name and just like Martin Luther's name, who spoke truth to power at great risk, digging deep and redefining faith so that salvation could reach the ends of the earth. So that his brothers and sisters would know the words of their faith, would know that the words of the faith define and create them and are not outside of them in some foreign language, but are their own very substance. Martin Luther King Jr. took this name for himself, chose this name for himself, I believe, because he knew something, even at a precociously young age, the call that was upon his life. Jesus today is walking down the path, and his very first 2 disciples are with him. And Jesus stops on the path, turns around, and says, "What are you looking for? What are you looking for? What are you looking for?" What we're looking for will define what we see. As I mentioned to Kenton later that night, gosh, isn't it awe? Isn't it wonder that trains our eye to see what we need to see? If our eye is trained toward the photo that we will have at the end of the journey, to the validation that we will receive from others when we get back from our trip, then that is what we will see. But if our eyes are open to wonder, if our eyes are open to the transformation that God calls us to, if our eyes are open to what we cannot see, then oh my gosh, what lays ahead? How will we be transformed on that journey? What challenges will we dare to face? What courage and endurance will we dig down deep and pull up? What call will we name in one another? Jesus looks at Peter, who we know now as Peter, said, "You are Simon, son of John. But actually, you are a rock. You are Cephas. You are Peter. You are the rock upon whom I will build my church." Who are you? What are you looking for?